Hello to everyone listening from around the world. Today's account comes from Daniel, 41, who shared what happened when he discovered that his mother had forged legal documents, intercepted court filings, and manufactured the disappearance of his wife and newborn twin daughters, leaving him to grieve a family he never actually lost.
Evelyn Mercer wrote the letter herself. She used Laura's handwriting. She had spent 3 weeks practicing it from the lease documents Laura had signed when we moved into the Hyde Park house. She used Laura's favorite pen, a Pilot G2, blue ink, medium point, which she had taken from the kitchen drawer during one of her uninvited Sunday visits. She placed the letter on the kitchen table at 11:14 on a Tuesday morning in September, in a spot she knew I would find it the moment I came through the front door. She had a key to my house. She had always had a key to my house. I had given it to her the week Laura and I moved in, because Evelyn Mercer was the kind of woman who received keys rather than asked for them. And I was, at 29 years old, still the kind of man who handed them over without thinking about what they opened. My name is Daniel Mercer. I am 41 years old. I am a construction project manager working out of an office on Edwards Road in the Norwood neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio. I have been doing this work for 15 years, which means I know how to read a set of plans, identify the load-bearing elements, and understand exactly which components, if removed, will bring the entire structure down. I should have applied that skill to my own family 6 years earlier. I did not. The woman who built the structure that collapsed around me was my mother, Evelyn Mercer, 68 years old, widow of Richard Mercer, who had built a commercial real estate portfolio across the greater Cincinnati area before his heart attack in 2009. Leaving Evelyn with 11 properties, a house in Hyde Park that backed up to the reservoir, and the specific, sustained confidence of a woman who had never once in her adult life been told no by anyone whose opinion she respected. She did not respect my opinion. She tolerated it. There is a difference, and I understood it by the time I was 12, and I spent the next 17 years pretending I didn't. Laura was different. Her full name was Laura Patton when I met her, Laura Mercer by the time any of this happened. She was a pediatric nurse at Cincinnati Children's Hospital on Burnett Avenue, working the night shift in the cardiac unit, the kind of work that requires a person to be both technically precise and humanly present simultaneously. She grew up in Covington, Kentucky, across the river, in a row house on Greenup Street with a mother who waitressed and a father who drove a delivery truck, and a childhood that was, by any measure, the opposite of mine. Evelyn noticed this immediately. Evelyn noticed everything immediately. It was her primary skill and her most dangerous weapon. Laura and I were married in June of 2016 at a ceremony at the Cincinnati Art Museum on Eden Park Drive, with a reception that Evelyn paid for and therefore controlled in every detail that mattered. The centerpieces were orchids, Evelyn's choice. The band played standards, Evelyn's choice. The seating chart placed Laura's parents at a table near the kitchen, also Evelyn's choice, though that one she dressed up as a logistical necessity. Laura noticed. Laura always noticed, but Laura was the kind of woman who picked her battles carefully, and at our wedding, standing in the gallery surrounded by 19th century paintings and her husband and a future she had chosen deliberately, she decided that the centerpieces and the seating chart were not the battle. She was right, they weren't. The battle came later. I didn't know yet, standing at the altar in the Cincinnati Art Museum in June of 2016, that my mother had already decided the marriage would end. I didn't know she was simply waiting for the right instrument. I didn't know she would find it in a set of twin girls who had my eyes and Laura's laugh, and that she would use the most important day of my life as the moment to begin dismantling everything I had built. The twins were born on September 3, 2018, Nora and June Mercer, 6 pounds 4 ounces and 5 pounds 11 ounces respectively, born 14 minutes apart at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center on Albert Sabin Way. I was in the room. I held both of them within the first hour. Laura was exhausted and radiant in the specific way of a woman who has done something that required everything she had and is now resting in the knowledge that it was worth it. Evelyn arrived at the hospital at 2 in the afternoon. She brought flowers, white lilies arranged by the florist she used for every occasion, tied with a cream-colored ribbon. She held Nora for 4 minutes, and June for 3. She looked at Laura across the hospital room with the specific expression she used when she was assessing a situation rather than experiencing it. She kissed my cheek on the way out. "She's going to struggle," Evelyn said quietly at the door. "New mothers from difficult backgrounds often do. Keep an eye on her." I should have said something. I didn't. That was, I have come to understand, the moment I failed my family. Not 2 weeks later when I came home to the empty house. Not during the 6 years that followed. That moment, at the door of a hospital room, holding a cream-colored ribbon from a bunch of white lilies, was where the story turned, and I said nothing and let my mother walk out with her assessment and her plan fully intact. 2 weeks after Nora and June were born, I came home from a site visit in Mason at 6:15 on a Tuesday evening. The house was quiet. Not the quiet of sleeping babies. A different quiet. The kind that has texture and weight. I set my keys on the counter and stood in the kitchen for a moment, reading the quality of that silence the way you read a job site before you walk it, looking for the thing that's off. The high chair Laura had assembled the previous weekend was gone. The diaper bag that had lived on the hook by the back door was gone. The baby monitor on the kitchen counter was gone. The letter was on the kitchen table. It was written in blue ink on a piece of cream-colored stationery I didn't recognize. The handwriting was Laura's. The particular, slightly left-leaning cursive she used for personal notes, the one I had seen on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the label she'd written for the box of baby clothes she'd organized by size in the spare room. It said she couldn't do it, that the pressure was too much, that she had taken the girls to her sister's house in Florence, Kentucky, and needed time, and needed me not to contact her. I read it 3 times. Then I called Laura's sister, Beth, in Florence. Beth answered on the second ring. Her voice was careful, the careful voice of someone who has been told a story and is trying to honor it without fully believing it. "She's here, Danny. She's okay. She needs some time. Beth, I need to talk to her. She doesn't want to talk right now. Her babies are 2 weeks old. Beth, something is wrong. Danny," a pause. "She's made her decision. I think you need to respect that." I called Laura's phone, disconnected. I drove to Florence that night. Beth met me at the door of her house on Idlewild Drive and told me very quietly, with the apologetic firmness of someone delivering a message they didn't write, that Laura was not there, that she had moved on, that she would be in touch through an attorney when she was ready. I drove home. I sat in the Hyde Park house in the dark for 2 hours. Then I called my mother. Evelyn arrived within 20 minutes. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where the letter had been. And she held my hands and told me that some women were not built for the demands of marriage and motherhood, that it was not my fault, that I would grieve and heal and move forward, that she would help me with everything. I believed her. I want to be precise about that. I believed my mother completely, not because I was foolish. I have never been a foolish man. I believed her because she was sitting across from me in my kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night, holding my hands. And the alternative, the thing that would have required me to believe that the woman who raised me had orchestrated the disappearance of my wife and newborn daughters, was so far outside what I thought a human being was capable of doing to her own child that my mind simply would not hold it. That is not weakness. That is the specific vulnerability of a person who trusts the people who should be trustworthy. I understand that now. It took me 6 years to get there. The 6 years that followed had their own texture, and I will not pretend they didn't. I filed for divorce on the advice of an attorney Evelyn recommended, a probate and family law specialist named Gary Stanton, who had represented Evelyn's estate interests for a decade, and who, I now understand, was not representing my interests in any meaningful way. Gary told me Laura had retained counsel in Florence. He told me her attorney had responded to my child support filing. He showed me the response documents. They said that paternity was disputed. I had never disputed paternity. I had never filed anything asserting I had. But Gary showed me the document, with my name on it. And I was 32 years old and exhausted and grieving, and I looked at the signature and thought it looked like mine. And I filed it away in the part of my mind that was managing the practical machinery of a loss I still didn't understand. That document, the forged response to Laura's child support filing, bearing a signature that was not mine, submitted by a firm I had never retained, was sitting in the Hamilton County Family Court records for 6 years. I did not know it existed. Laura did not know it was forged, and Evelyn Mercer was sitting in her Hyde Park house on Sunday evenings, serving pot roast on her good china, telling me that I needed to move forward. That time healed everything, that the girls were better off with a stable mother and not a broken home. I ate her pot roast. I drank her wine. I thanked her for dinner. I didn't know yet what was in the filing. I didn't know yet about the notary, or the junior associate, or the intercepted correspondence. I didn't know yet that on a Wednesday evening in November, 6 years after that Tuesday night in September, I was going to turn on the television and find out that everything I had been told was wrong. I didn't know any of it. What I knew, sitting across from my mother at her Sunday dinner table for 6 years, was that I had 2 daughters somewhere who were growing up without me, and that I had accepted that as a consequence of Laura's choice. And that the specific, quiet grief of that acceptance had become so familiar, I had stopped recognizing it as grief at all. I had started to mistake it for peace. It wasn't peace. It was the absence of information.
Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these accounts had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and subscribe. You're going to love it here.
Wednesday, November 6th, 7:22 p.m. I was eating leftover pasta at the kitchen counter of my apartment in Oakley, standing up because I lived alone and had for 6 years and had developed the specific habits of a man who eats standing up over a sink because there is no particular reason to set a place at a table for one person. The television was on in the other room. I had not been watching it. I had been listening to it the way you listen to something you're not paying attention to, as background, as company, as the sound of a world continuing to operate outside the walls of an apartment where nothing particularly interesting was happening. Then I heard a name. Laura Mercer. I set down the fork. I walked to the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. I stood there, one hand on the doorframe, looking at the screen. On the screen was my wife. She was 38 years old, and she was sitting across from a news anchor in what appeared to be her place of business, a clean, organized office with a company sign visible on the wall behind her that read, Patton Home Health Care, which told me she had gone back to her maiden name. That detail landed in my chest with a weight I wasn't prepared for. She was wearing a dark blue blazer over a white shirt. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. Her expression was composed and warm, and carried the specific confidence of a woman who had been through something significant, and had come through it knowing exactly who she was. Beside her, just outside the frame of the formal interview setup but visible at the edge of the shot, were 2 little girls, sitting on a small couch, 6 years old, dark hair, my eyes. I sat down on the living room floor. I am not sure why. My legs simply decided the floor was the appropriate place to be for whatever was about to happen. The interviewer asked Laura about the business. Laura answered clearly and specifically. 14 employees, home healthcare services across Hamilton and Kenton counties, started 4 years ago from a spare bedroom in her house in Covington. With a laptop and a nursing license and what she described, with a dry, quiet smile, as an extensive amount of stubbornness. The interviewer asked about the girls. Laura glanced toward the edge of the frame, toward Nora and June, who were occupied with something on a tablet and not paying attention to the camera. Then she looked back at the interviewer. Then, for just a moment, less than a second, the specific duration of a decision being made, she looked directly into the camera lens. I got up from the floor. I walked to the television and stood directly in front of it, close enough to see every detail of her face, close enough that the screen filled everything I could see. "I've never stopped hoping he'd find us," she said. The interviewer moved on. The segment continued. I did not hear the rest of it. I was already reaching for my phone. "I want to tell you what those 11 seconds felt like. Not because it is important to the sequence of events that followed. It isn't. But because I think you deserve to understand the specific quality of what happens to a person when 6 years of accepted grief is reclassified in a single moment. It is not relief. Relief implies that something bad has ended. This was not the ending of something bad. This was the discovery that something bad had been built around me like a room with no doors, and that I had been living in that room for 6 years, calling it my life, and that the walls were not real. It is not rage. Rage comes later. Rage requires information, and at 7:22 p.m. on a Wednesday in November, standing in my Oakley apartment, I did not yet have information. What I had was a phone number I had memorized and never deleted, a name on a television screen, and 2 little girls with dark hair and my eyes sitting on a couch at the edge of a camera frame. I called Laura's number. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" Her voice was careful. She did not recognize the number. "Laura." My voice came out steady. I was not sure how. "It's Daniel." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. I counted. "Danny. I just saw you on Fox 19. Another silence, shorter. "I've been trying to reach you for 6 years, she said. The careful tone was gone. What replaced it was something that had been waiting a long time to come out. "Your attorney said you disputed paternity. There were documents, Danny, with your signature. I never disputed paternity. There were documents. I never signed anything. Laura, I never disputed paternity. I never told any attorney to file that. I came home and the house was empty and there was a letter." "What letter?" "On the kitchen table, in your handwriting, saying you'd taken the girls to Beth's." The silence this time was different. It was the silence of someone reconstructing something from the foundation up. "Danny." Her voice was very quiet. "I never wrote a letter. I never went to Beth's. I left with the girls because my attorney told me you had filed to dispute paternity, and I was scared, and I didn't know what was happening. Your attorney told you, a woman contacted me, said she was representing you, said there was a dispute and I should take the girls somewhere safe while the filing was being sorted. I tried to call you for weeks. My phone was... I stopped. Laura, I need to ask you something. Okay. Did my mother ever contact you directly? In those first weeks? The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Danny, she said, I think we need to talk in person. We met the following Saturday at a coffee shop on Madison Road in Oakley, a place called Deeper Roots that I had been going to for 3 years and which felt, on that particular Saturday morning, like the most important room I had ever sat in. Laura arrived at 9 a.m. exactly. She was wearing a dark green jacket and carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized as the kind nurses use for documentation. Organized, tabbed, ready for any eventuality. She had prepared for this meeting the way she prepared for everything. Completely. She sat down across from me. We looked at each other for a moment. 6 years is a specific amount of time. It is long enough to change a face and not long enough to make a face unrecognizable. I knew her. She knew me. We were both, in our own ways, a version of the people who had stood at an altar at the Cincinnati Art Museum in June of 2016. How are the girls? I asked. They're good. A pause. They ask about you. I told them there was a misunderstanding, that their father didn't know where we were. That's true. I know that now. She opened the portfolio. Inside were documents, organized chronologically, the way a nurse organizes a patient file. She had kept everything, every filing, every response, every letter from every attorney, every phone record she had managed to preserve. She laid them on the table between us. The woman who contacted me, Laura said, the one who said she was representing you, I only ever spoke to her on the phone. She said her name was Patricia Holt. I looked her up later. There's no Patricia Holt licensed to practice family law in Ohio or Kentucky. My mother's building, I said slowly. There's a woman who works the front desk. Her name is Patricia. Laura looked at me steadily. The letter on your kitchen table, she said. I didn't write it. I have never written anything on cream-colored stationery in my life. A pause. Your mother gave me a box of it as a wedding gift. I sat with that for a moment. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I had not touched it. The signature on the paternity dispute, I said. Can I see it? She found the document and slid it across the table. I looked at the signature. I had looked at it once before, in Gary Stanton's office, and accepted it. Looking at it now, looking at it as a man who was looking for a forgery, rather than a man who was too grief-stricken to question what he was being shown, I could see it. The D in Daniel was slightly too wide. The loop in the M of Mercer was closed where mine is always open. It was close. It was very close. But it was not my signature. I put the document down on the table. I need to call an attorney, I said. Not the one my mother recommended.
If you've been listening for a while and want accounts like this to keep coming, it really helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. For real.
Before I tell you about the attorney and the document examiner and what they found, I need to tell you about a Sunday dinner. It happened in the spring of 2021, 2.5 years into the 6 years of silence. I had driven to the Hyde Park house for Evelyn's standing Sunday dinner, the way I did most Sunday evenings, because routine is what a grieving man reaches for when everything else has been taken from him. Evelyn made her pot roast. She opened a bottle of Cabernet. She set the table with the good china, the china she used for every occasion that she considered worthy of the china, which was every occasion she controlled. We were halfway through dinner when Evelyn said something. She was talking about a colleague of Richard's, a man who had recently finalized a difficult divorce, and she said, with the particular, smooth authority she used when she was making a point she had rehearsed, "The children always land on their feet when the mother is capable. It's the fathers who struggle. Fathers grieve the absence. Mothers simply adapt and provide." She refilled her wine glass. "The girls will be fine, Danny," she said. "They have Laura. Whatever her faults as a wife, she was always going to be a capable mother. That's enough." I remember the specific way she said it, not as comfort. Evelyn rarely offered comfort without an agenda underneath it. She said it with the quiet satisfaction of a woman confirming something she already knew to be true. Not reassuring me. Confirming. I filed it. I did not know what to do with it. Whatever her faults as a wife. I had never told my mother that Laura had faults as a wife. I had never, in 6 years of Sunday dinners, described my marriage as anything other than one that had ended because Laura left. I had never given Evelyn a verdict on Laura's character as a spouse, because what verdict was I going to give? I had loved her. I had come home to an empty house. That was all I knew. Evelyn knew more than that, and in that one sentence, at that dinner table, in the spring of 2021, she had almost told me so. I sat across from her and finished my pot roast and said nothing, because I did not yet have the information that would have made that sentence mean what it meant. I had it now. I called Greg Hopper that afternoon after leaving Deeper Roots. Greg Hopper practiced family law out of an office on 4th Street in downtown Cincinnati in one of the older buildings near the courthouse, the kind of office that smelled like paper files and professional certainty. I found him through a referral from a colleague at work named Alan, who had gone through a difficult divorce 3 years earlier and had come out the other side with his house, his retirement, and his sanity, which he attributed entirely to Greg. Greg picked up his own phone on a Friday afternoon, which told me something useful about him. I explained the situation in the order it had happened. I did not editorialize. I gave him the facts in sequence, the way you give a contractor a set of plans. Here is what exists, here is what was supposed to exist, here is the gap between the two. Greg was quiet for a moment after I finished. You said the signature on the paternity dispute doesn't look right to you. It's close, but it's not mine. And the original letter, the one you found on the kitchen table, you still have it? I thought about it. It's in a box in my storage unit. I kept it. I don't know why I kept it. I couldn't throw it away. Keep it, Greg said. Don't touch it, don't fold it, don't move it. I need you to pull every financial record you have. Joint accounts from the marriage, anything in your name from 2018 to 2019, and anything your mother may have contributed to during that period. Can you do that? Yes. I also need the name of the attorney who handled your original divorce filing. Gary Stanton. A pause. Gary Stanton represented your divorce? My mother recommended him. Another pause. Longer. Danny, Greg said, I need you to come in on Monday morning, 8 a.m., and I need you to bring your wife. My ex-wife. Bring her. I called Pete Harlan that evening. Pete and I had been friends since the University of Cincinnati, where we had both studied engineering and had both, in our junior year, taken the same elective in materials science taught by a professor who had the gift of making technical precision feel like the most interesting thing in the world. Pete had gone into forensic document examination. He worked for a private firm in Columbus and drove a sensible sedan and had the specific, unhurried manner of a man who spent his days looking at things other people had tried to hide. I explained what I had. Pete said he could be in Cincinnati by Saturday morning. He arrived at 9 a.m. at the Deeper Roots coffee shop on Madison Road with a briefcase and a pair of magnifying loupes and the expression of a man who was already curious about something before he had seen it. I laid out the letter from the kitchen table and the paternity dispute document side by side on the table. Pete looked at them for 22 minutes without saying anything. Then he looked up. The letter, he said, was written by someone who practiced the handwriting. You can see the practice effect in the pressure distribution. Slightly more uniform than natural writing, the way handwriting looks when someone is concentrating on replicating rather than composing. Whoever wrote this is good, but they're not Laura. And the signature? Pete looked back at the document. He picked up the loupe and held it over the signature for a long moment. Then he set the loupe down carefully on the table, the way a man sets something down when he wants both hands free to think. Danny. He said it the way you say someone's name when what follows is going to cost them something. Someone forged your signature on a federal family court filing. I did not answer immediately. I looked out the window at Madison Road, where Cincinnati was going about its Saturday morning. A woman pushing a stroller, a man walking a dog, 2 teenagers on bicycles. The ordinary machinery of a world that had been turning for 6 years while I sat inside a manufactured grief and called it my life. Okay, I said. Okay? I need you to put that in writing, I said. Whatever format holds up in court. I need a document examiner's report, Pete, with your credentials attached that says exactly what you just told me. Pete nodded. He closed his briefcase. He picked up his coffee. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has known you for 20 years and understands, without being told, that you are about to do something that needs doing. I'll have it to you by Wednesday, he said. I didn't know yet what Greg Hopper was going to find when he pulled the full case history. I didn't know yet what the junior associate at Evelyn's attorney's office was going to say when faced with the choice between his bar license and his employer's secrets. And I absolutely did not know yet that the most important conversation of my life was going to happen, not in a courtroom or an attorney's office, but on a park bench in Covington, Kentucky, on a cold Saturday morning in December, with a 6-year-old girl who had my eyes and one very direct question. Greg Hopper spread the full case history across his conference table on a Monday morning in late November, and the story it told was the story of a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to make problems disappear by making them someone else's. The Hamilton County Family Court records showed 2 child support filings from Laura, one in October of 2018, 6 weeks after the twins were born, and one in March of 2019. Both had received responses. Both responses had been filed by a firm called Stanton and Associates, which was Gary Stanton's firm. Both responses disputed paternity. Both bore a signature that Pete Harlan's report had now formally identified as a forgery. Gary Stanton had not retired. He was still practicing, still in his office on Montgomery Road in Kenwood, still representing clients whose primary asset was the confidence that their secrets were well managed. Greg Hopper filed a complaint with the Ohio State Bar Association against Gary Stanton on a Tuesday. He filed a second complaint with the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office for document fraud and interference with parental rights on Wednesday. He filed a civil complaint against Evelyn Mercer, in her capacity as the person whose instructions Gary Stanton had been following, which the paper trail, once properly assembled, made unmistakably clear, on Thursday. 3 complaints, 3 days. Greg Hopper moved the way good attorneys move, methodically, sequentially, and without announcing what was coming until it had already arrived. The first domino fell on a Friday. A junior associate at Stanton and Associates, a 29-year-old named Kevin Marsh, 2 years out of law school, who had been the person physically tasked with filing the forged documents with the court, received notice of the bar complaint on a Friday afternoon. Kevin Marsh called his own attorney by 4 p.m. Kevin Marsh's attorney called Greg Hopper's office by 4:30. By 5 p.m., Kevin Marsh had agreed to provide a full written account of the instructions he had received, the source of those instructions, and the mechanism by which the documents had been prepared and filed. The source of the instructions was Gary Stanton. The source of Gary Stanton's instructions was Evelyn Mercer. Kevin Marsh wrote 12 pages. He wrote them over a weekend in consultation with his attorney and delivered them to Greg Hopper's office on a Monday morning. They were specific, dated, and included 2 email exchanges between Gary Stanton and Evelyn Mercer that Gary had apparently not thought to delete. Perhaps because he had trusted for 20 years that Evelyn's money and Evelyn's discretion were sufficient insulation from any consequence. They were not sufficient. Greg called me at 8:15 that Monday morning. "We have the written account," he said. "We have the emails. We have Pete's document examination report, and I've just been informed that Gary Stanton's attorney has contacted the bar to begin a cooperation process." What does that mean? It means Gary Stanton is going to tell them everything to save his license, which means we don't need him to tell us anything. We already have it. His cooperation simply corroborates what we already know. And my mother. A pause. "Evelyn's attorney called me this morning," Greg said. "She has retained new counsel. Her previous attorney, who was Gary Stanton's firm, has formally withdrawn from representing her, which, given the circumstances, should not surprise anyone. What does she face? Civilly, significant exposure, document fraud, interference with parental rights under Ohio statute, the 6 years of child support you would have paid, calculated at the standard rate. I am going to argue that amount should be awarded to the Girls' Education Trust. The Hyde Park house, which Evelyn owns outright, is the primary asset against which that judgment will be satisfied. Criminally? The prosecutor's office is reviewing. Document fraud at this level, with this level of insulation between her and the execution, and this amount of time elapsed, I'm not going to promise you a criminal outcome. What I can promise you is that the civil outcome will be complete, and it will be public, and it will follow her name for the rest of her life." I looked out the window of my Oakley apartment. It was a Monday morning in late November. The sky was the specific flat gray of a Cincinnati late autumn, the kind that settles in around Thanksgiving and does not lift until March. "Greg," I said, "what about the girls?" "That," he said, "is what I need to talk to you and Laura about together, because that is the conversation that matters most, and it needs to be handled correctly."
If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor: subscribe. A lot of people listen without ever doing it. It costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Now, where were we?
Laura and I met with Greg together the following Wednesday. We sat on the same side of the conference table, not by design, just by the natural arrangement of two people who were, for the first time in 6 years, moving in the same direction. Greg laid out the parental rights restoration process under Ohio law. He explained that Daniel Mercer had never legally relinquished parental rights. The forged documents had never actually terminated anything because they had been fraudulently filed and were therefore void. He explained that a petition for restoration of parental contact could be filed immediately, and that given the documented circumstances, he anticipated no opposition from the court. He also said something else. "The girls are 6 years old," he said. "The legal process will move at its own pace, but I want to be honest with both of you. What matters most here is not the legal outcome. It is the first conversation. How you handle the first meeting will shape everything that comes after it." Laura and I looked at each other across the conference table. "She told them there was a misunderstanding," I said, "that their father didn't know where they were." "That's what I told them," Laura said, "because that's what I believed, and because they deserved a version of the truth that didn't require them to understand things a 6-year-old shouldn't have to understand." "It's also accurate," I said. "Yes," she said, "it is." We agreed on a Saturday. We agreed on a park. We agreed on the park along the riverfront in Covington, Kentucky, because it was Laura's territory, her city, her side of the river, and because meeting the girls somewhere they felt safe was more important than anything else. I spent the 2 weeks between that Wednesday and that Saturday doing the work that needed doing and not thinking too hard about what I was going to say, because every version of what I might say sounded either insufficient or excessive. I eventually concluded that what a 6-year-old needed from a first meeting with her father was not a speech, it was a person, just a person, present, patient, there. The morning of December 14th was cold and clear. The kind of cold that has no ambiguity to it, not the damp cold of November, but the clean, sharp cold of December in the Ohio Valley, where the air comes off the river with a quality that makes everything feel specific and real. I drove across the Clay Wade Bailey Bridge from Cincinnati into Covington at 8:45 a.m. I parked on Riverside Drive and walked to the park along the river. I found the bench Laura had described, the one facing the river, with the Cincinnati skyline on the opposite bank, the one where she sometimes brought the girls on weekend mornings. I sat down. I put my hands in my jacket pockets. I waited. They arrived at 9:02. Laura first, coming along the river path with the specific, measured pace of a woman who has decided to walk at the speed that allows two 6-year-olds to keep up. Nora on her left, June on her right. Both of them in winter jackets, Nora's red, June's navy blue. Both of them looking at the bench where I was sitting. Laura stopped about 10 feet away. She looked at me. I looked at her. She gave me the smallest possible nod, the nod of a woman who has assessed the situation and found it adequate. And she said quietly to the girls, "That's your dad." June looked at her mother. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at her sister. Nora looked at me directly, no hesitation, no looking away. She walked forward, not running, walking, with the deliberate pace of a child who has decided to approach something and is doing it on her own terms. She stopped 3 feet away from the bench and looked at me with the specific, unfiltered assessment of a child who has not yet learned to soften how she looks at people. "Did you know about us?" she asked. "I have been in rooms where difficult things were said. I have heard doctors deliver diagnoses and attorneys deliver verdicts and foremen deliver the news that a structure has failed and people are going to be affected by that failure. I have heard my mother tell me that my wife had left me in a voice calibrated to sound like grief while being something else entirely. Nothing prepared me for a 6-year-old asking me that question in the clean, cold air of a December morning on a riverfront bench in Covington, Kentucky. Nothing could have." "No," I said, "and the day I found out, I came to find you." Nora looked at me for a long moment, then she sat down on the bench next to me. June watched her sister sit down, then June walked forward and sat on my other side. Laura stood on the path 10 feet away, watching. I did not look at her. I was looking at the Cincinnati skyline across the river, and the two small people sitting beside me, who had my eyes and their mother's patience, and the specific, particular quality of a December morning on a riverfront bench that I knew, with the certainty of a man who has spent his life reading structures, I would remember for the rest of my life. We sat for a while. We didn't say much. It was, I think, exactly right. Here is what I have come to understand about the 6 years I spent inside my mother's architecture of deception. I was not a passive participant. I want to be honest about that. Evelyn Mercer built something elaborate and sustained and cruel. Evelyn Mercer built something elaborate and sustained and cruel. She forged documents and fabricated correspondence and deployed the specific authority of a mother over a son who had never fully learned to question her. But she did not build it in a vacuum. She built it in the space I gave her, which was considerable. I gave her a key to my house. I accepted a letter without questioning its stationery. I hired the attorney she recommended without interviewing a second one. I sat at her dinner table for 6 years and ate her pot roast and called the absence of my daughters a grief I had learned to live with rather than a crime I should have investigated. That is not guilt. I want to be clear about the difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt implies that I chose this, that I had the information and made the wrong decision. I did not have the information. What I had, for 6 years, was a manufactured version of events constructed specifically to withstand my scrutiny by someone who had spent 30 years learning what I would and would not question. What I had was trust in the wrong person. That is not the same as guilt, but it is also not the same as innocence. It is something in between, and I think it is important to name it accurately because the temptation when you are the wronged party in a story like this is to cast yourself as entirely without agency, as a man things happened to, rather than a man who made choices that allowed things to happen. I made choices. I chose every Sunday for 6 years to sit across from a woman who had stolen my family and call it healing. I chose not to hire a second attorney. I chose not to look harder at the signature on a document that didn't look entirely right. I chose those things because I was grieving, and because I trusted my mother, and because the alternative was unthinkable to me. The alternative was true. Here is what I want to tell you about Evelyn Mercer. Not what she deserves. The civil judgment will address what she deserves, and the public record will hold it. What I want to tell you is what I learned about the specific kind of person she is, because I think it is useful. Evelyn did not hate Laura. That is the important thing to understand. This was not a story driven by hatred. Evelyn loved me, in the way that controlling people love, as a function of ownership rather than connection. Laura was a threat not because she was bad, but because she was good in a way that made Evelyn's version of love look inadequate by comparison. Laura was warm and direct and entirely unimpressed by Evelyn's china and Evelyn's centerpieces and Evelyn's carefully managed version of a family. And Evelyn, who had spent 30 years managing everything around her, could not manage Laura, so she removed her. This is what happens when a person mistakes control for love and loses access to the thing they were trying to control. They do not grieve it, they eliminate it. And then they move on and set another place at the Sunday table and pour another glass of wine and continue being the woman who manages everything. Right up until the moment the thing they eliminated turns on a television and looks directly into a camera lens and says, to a man she has never stopped believing is out there, "I've never stopped hoping he'd find us." I found them. It took 6 years and a news segment and a forensic document examiner and a Monday morning phone call and a park bench in December. But I found them. June asked me, on that December morning, whether I was going to come to her school's winter concert. It was in 2 weeks. She was going to be in the second row. She had a solo, 4 bars of Silent Night, which she had been practicing since October, and which, she informed me with the serious precision of a child who takes these things correctly, she had almost entirely right. Almost? I said. The high part, she said. I keep going flat on the high part. I'll be there, I said. And I'll listen for the high part. She nodded. The matter was settled. That is what 6 years of manufactured absence looks like when it ends. Not a courtroom victory, though that comes, and it matters. Not a confrontation, though that happens too, in its own time, in its own way. It looks like a 6-year-old telling you about a concert and trusting you, tentatively and without ceremony, to show up. Evelyn Mercer spent that same Tuesday evening in the Anderson Township apartment she had moved into after the Hyde Park house was sold to satisfy the civil judgment. A smaller place, a quieter street, far from the reservoir and the good china and the Sunday dinners where she had managed everything and everyone and called it love. I showed up. I sat in the second row of a Covington Elementary School gymnasium on a cold Tuesday evening in December, next to Laura, and I listened for the high part. June didn't go flat. She never went flat. She had been right all along, and she just needed someone to be there to hear it.